Hello and welcome to Allshorts. And I'd like to welcome Brendan Donnelly from Rejoin the EU Party. So please, Brendan, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and the Rejoin Party, and a little bit maybe about your mission statement? What is your goal?
Well, the goal is to do what we can to bring forward the day when the United Kingdom rejoins the European Union. We think it's certainly going to happen, but we think it should happen sooner rather than later. It shouldn't be something that's postponed to the dim and distant future. A long time ago, I used to be a Conservative member of the European Parliament. I'm no longer a Conservative, and I'm no longer a member of the European Parliament. So things have changed quite a lot. The Rejoin EU Party brings together people from different political backgrounds. Mine is Conservative. There are people who wouldn't hesitate to describe themselves as Corbynites, Greens, Liberal Democrats, people of no political parties. What we think, however, is that it's a democratic disgrace that so many years after Brexit, and when the opinion polls show clearly that so many people want to rejoin, there are none of the major parties, particularly in England, offering that as an option. And that's where we come in. We want to offer people the option to express the desire to get back into the European Union. Now, we're not going to get a majority for that at this election. Obviously, we probably won't get any MPs elected. But we want to be part of the momentum and the process, which will be pressing down and encouraging the next government, probably a Labour government, to abandon its absurd red lines and get much closer to the European Union. And we say,
don't get me started on that one.
Rejoin as soon as we can.
Oh, that's brilliant. Oh, thank you, Brendan. Now, as we all know, the UK left the European Union on the 31st of January 2020 and is now considered a third country. Now, under EU law, it's placed considerable obstacles in the way, such as diversion from EU-derived laws, which ironically we helped to make, laws that set out well, to protect its citizens from tyrannical governments. Another reason why we need a constitution. And if we do want to rejoin the European Union one day, the UK is going to have to go through, well, the framework set out in the Article 49. So here's my first question for you, Donny. Can I call you Donny? No, don't.
Whatever you like.
Well, you're going to have to be building some political support, and I think that's going to be very difficult for joining the EU across sort of different regions and demographics in the United Kingdom, and it's going to be tough. We've got to get the backing of politicians, what have you, but also the media. Now, we got this Brexit with just that, the backing of the dominant, self-serving Michael Gove type Boris Johnson politicians and foreign-owned media. Now, something needs to be done about that. We need some laws regarding that, like we got in France, for instance. Now, although the sands have shifted since the Red Wall fell to the charms of, well, apparently Russian-funded Leave.eu campaigns and sovereignty. I don't think the argument is whether we should necessarily join the EU, because I think that's a done deal. The polls pretty much suggest that now. You know, the majority of people in the United Kingdom want to rejoin, don't they?
Yes, and the strange thing is that they want it, although they haven't had any political leadership from the major parties.
No.
The Conservatives are pretending that Brexit is just fine. The Liberal Democrats only want to rejoin in the very dim and distant future. And the Labour Party is committed to making Brexit work. And yet, in spite of that, there are now clear majorities of people who want to rejoin. It's fair enough to say that this opinion isn't necessarily a solid and definitive one, but it is very striking that this is an opinion the British public have come to, in spite of the media hostility, in spite of the government and the political class not wanting to talk about Europe. It's very strange. And when we have a government that probably will be forced by circumstances to be a more pro-European one, even if it doesn't necessarily start out wanting to be a pro-European one, I think that opinion could go even further in favour of rejoin. So I don't think that there's too much difficulty about getting a popular consensus to rejoin. The difficulty is the politicians. the politicians have got their electoral calculations, which aren't always well founded, but
No.
that's what they are worried by. And we hope that through the Rejoin EU Party, we'll be able to show that there are votes in being pro-European, and there's a danger of losing votes by being anti-European.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But do you think maybe that the whole idea of another referendum and vote and all the division it brings, do you think the people are ready for that?
As I say, my strong impression is that that's a political consideration rather than a popular consideration. There are people who will say, yes, it's too soon, it will be too divisive. But I think that in a couple of years' time, if I'm right, that the opinion polls go even further in the direction of wanting to rejoin, the divisiveness will be in not talking about Europe, in saying we've got to be stuck with Brexit indefinitely because of a vote in 2016. I think that the people who voted in 2016 to leave very often have changed their minds, and it isn't a matter of great indignity or great humiliation to them that it is to politicians. If you're a politician who spent most of your career saying that the European Union was the incarnation of everything evil, and now to have to say we ought to rejoin, that's a humiliation. But for lots of people who looked at the arguments, perhaps didn't look at the arguments as deeply as they should in 2016, it's not going to be a life or philosophy changing decision now to say let's go back. They'll regard it as a pragmatic decision based on superior information.
When they start filling it in their pockets, people start, well, they are filling it in the pockets now, to be fair. We've got a GDP that hasn't really grown, and there's a GDP with very little profit margin in it. So the tax take is lower, so there isn't much money for services. Now, you think
all those things are true,
exactly.
that people worry about, particularly the National Health Service and the level of public services. But they forget that if we did rejoin the EU, then that increase of what 3, 4, 5%, whatever people talk about in GDP would be reflected in more government income as well, and that would feed through into better services, better public services.
Exactly. End of the day, you need the money to pay for the stuff. There's no getting around that. And the idea that the Labour Party is going to be able to provide all these services without borrowing it, I just don't see it myself. But
I think Starmer and his chums are over optimistic about the willingness of the EU to accommodate them. You made the point we're a third country now.
I was going to get to that in my next question.
There are some people in this country, even pro-EU people, who don't understand the implications of being a third party and being a third country.
Well, you got the ATA carnets, you got pet passports, you got veterinary, you got phytosanitary, food imports as well as exports. The list just goes on. Obviously, Northern Ireland, we've got not for EU stickers, we've got red, green lanes. You know, it goes on and on and on and on.
And it's going to get worse. It's going to get worse with the introduction of Schengen visas.
Yes, and the EES as well. Don't forget the EES, the electronic entry.
But one of the points I'd make is that up till now, the United Kingdom hasn't deviated, hasn't diverged very much from European legislation. The longer we stay outside the European Union, the more difficult it will be to get back in. And that's one of the reasons why we're pressing for it as soon as possible, back in when the divergence is limited, rather than when it's been going on for 20 years.
We don't want to be waiting too long. Now, one thing that's just coming up, went on to in my head earlier today, and at the moment, we've got a younger demographic that may remember being part of, I'm talking like, for instance, like people in their 20s, 30s, what have you, who obviously remember being inside the European Union. But the younger, let's say, for instance, children who were born 10 years ago, for instance, they might, well, they're not going to understand it. You're not going to necessarily understand the benefits of being a member. So the longer we wait, the other demographic seems to move on, and we've got a new demographic. It doesn't understand the European Union and what it was, what it was founded on.
I think yes, so that's a danger. But the opinion polls seem to suggest that the younger you are, the more inclined you are to want to rejoin the European Union. Apart from, as you say, the very youngest demographic, where there's a worrying tilt in a minority. It must be stressed, in a minority towards Farage and reform, and that is worrying. But I think that there's always a tendency among young people long time ago, I was one myself.
Really?
Young people always to be very skeptical of their elders, and it can take different forms. And
Oh,
one
most
of the
definitely.
forms it takes is to be with reform. But that's a very small minority, and I'm hopeful that even if they do quite well in this election, they'll have fizzled out by the time of the next general election.
Yeah, I hope so. But like, if you consider what's happening here in France with Marine Le Pen, one of my worries is a Marine Le Pen government, because obviously she's shown interest towards having a Frexit, even though she says she isn't now. I don't mean to say she wouldn't try and gain support on it later. Now, if, for instance, there is a Marine Le Pen government, they could veto. They're likely to do a Charles de Gaulle on us.
Well, yes, that's possible. It's something that some of the Brexiters in this country rather hope for. But I'm not convinced that there is going to be a Marine Le Pen government in France. There may or may not be. And even if there is, I don't think they will be indefinitely in power. And by the time the question comes of our rejoining, I suspect that France will be on a rather different political course.
I understand that.
It won't be in 2 or 3 years' time that the rejoin issue will be joined. And who knows where France will be in 3 or 4 years' time.
Yeah, I can see that, because it's fair to say that right-wing parties, once they get anywhere near power, they turn the people off, and then in one term, and that's it.
That's a risk that right-wing parties run, and I'm one of those people who think it wouldn't necessarily be a disaster if Reform got a couple of MPs, because I think they've had a very free and easy ride not being exposed to scrutiny.
Exactly. It's one thing being on the sidelines, another thing actually having policies.
Farage behaved disgracefully in the European Parliament. He never turned up for meetings. He just took his salary and that was it. But people didn't subject him to the sort of scrutiny he'd be subjected to if he were in the House of Commons. Personally, I regret that, but that's the way British politics work. I don't think you'd be able to get away. And what he said about Putin and Russia and the stink that's created is a good example of it. He wouldn't be able to get away with the careless and provocative things he says as an MP if he were an MP.
So, going back to Labour, with they wish to have sort of like a closer alignment with the European Union without the customs union or the single market, which just seems
yeah.
Now, do you think that's actually possible? And if so, how?
No, I don't. And I think that deep down, a lot of Labour ministers and advisors know it. It's just a convenient fiction to have to get them through the general election. It's kicking the can down the road.
Yeah, the thing that worries me when politicians say things like that is, to me, it's just a lie. Anyone who knows me will know that I've got a real bee in my bonnet about people who lie, and the politicians especially, because at the end of the day, they've got responsibility to the people, and we need sound, honest politicians. I know it's not necessarily going to happen 100%, but I'd like to see us heading in that direction. If we're going to gain public support, I think we're going to have to actually...
It's one of the reasons why we stand in the Rejoin EU Party, because we do stand for honesty. We think that cherry picking and pretending that you can define from the United Kingdom the terms of your relationship with the European Union, you can do it in a non-consensual way. We think that's dishonest, and we're just as critical of Labour as we are of the Conservatives, because at least the Conservatives have a coherent view. They don't like the European Union. They don't want to have anything to do with it. They think it's an instrument of the devil. It's barking mad, but at least it's coherent. Yeah. Whereas the pretense that you can, just by smiling at the European Union, have all the benefits of European membership and none of the responsibilities, the price, if you like, it is dishonest.
That's not how it works, is it? At the end of the day, it's a set of rules that they follow. It's a rules-based system. And if you don't follow the rules, well, then you're not in it, are you? It's just simple as that.
But it's also a club in the sense that I think
clubs have rules.
The European Union is too tolerant of people in the club. I think they're being too tolerant of the Hungarians at the moment, and they were too tolerant of the Poles. But that's the way it works. But that tolerance is not extended to people outside the club. And because the United Kingdom is not in the club anymore, it can't say, oh, well, it would make sense for them to make an exception for the United Kingdom. No, it really doesn't work that way. You're outside the club by your own decision, and that has consequences.
Yeah, it's let's say, for instance, right, you got a fresh referendum vote, and the people, voted to join the European Union, right? So yeah, I have is you signed your bit of paper, you hand delivered it because you're so excited. You've got your Article 49. There you go. There's my Article 49. Okay, but we don't meet the criteria at that stage at submitting Article 49, such as 1993 Copenhagen criteria. Like on one point, that would be our national debt. Like, for instance, they say 60 national debt. And I know there's countries in the EU that are already over that, but they're already in the European Union. And there's countries such as France, Belgium, Slovakia, I can't remember that, and Poland. All them countries are having pressure put upon them by the European Union because the debt's too high.
Poland's not in the euro.
No, I'm talking about the regarding
the
national debt, the national debt. So one thing, how we're going to get that down low enough to actually, because everything's a process, isn't it? It's a long road. Nothing's going to be overnight. We all know that, don't we? I wanted to rejoin. I live in France. I'd be stupid not to. Okay, there are people who voted to leave the European Union that I know lived just near me. I thought, crikey, you must be mad. But anyway, they did. So how are we going to convince member states to, not on the basis that we don't necessarily meet all the criteria at this stage, and also we've got to think about the sterling and the euro and what have you. How are we going to convince the member states not to veto Article 49, like we talked about a bit earlier? How are we going to do that? How are we going to win them over?
I think that people have two extreme views in this country. One, the EU doesn't want us back, and we're never going to get back. And the other view is that because we're so important and because they love us so much, they're going to roll out the welcome mat and we can get in on any terms. Neither of those is true, and obviously it's between the two. They do want us back, just as long as we don't spend as much time playing silly buggers as we did, particularly in the Brexit negotiations, post-referendum negotiations.
I think I agree with you. They do, like, for instance, they do want us back, I think, as a whole, but there are going to be member states that are going to play silly buggers.
Well, what I think will happen is that we will need to join the euro. We'll need to join Schengen. We won't be able to get the exception. Not just because the European Union wants us to, although they will want us to, but as a sign of our seriousness, that we're not going to get up again in 5 years' time and think, oh, well, perhaps we'll have a Brexit bis, a Brexit B plan. If you're in the euro, if you're in the Schengen arrangement, it's much more difficult to extricate yourself. And that will be a sign of seriousness and conviction to many within the European Union. But if the British turn up saying, oh, well, of course, we've got to have these special arrangements. We're not like you. Sterling is a world currency. We're in Ireland. We're this, that, and the other. We've got to have all the opt-outs. Then that will get a number of people's backs up, and quite understandably so.
Well, of course. And also, the sterling might not have quite so much power in the EU come 2025 once euro clearing. That's going to be another hurdle.
That's something that the city is worried about.
Very much so. They didn't vote for Brexit, just like Scotland didn't.
It's a paradoxical situation. There are a lot of people in the city who are worried about Brexit. But on the other hand, they don't like to advertise it too much for two reasons. One, they don't want to fall out with the government. And two, they don't want to advertise the fact that they themselves and their business models are put in jeopardy by Brexit.
Yes, that's why we don't hear about problems in businesses until the last minute.
Exactly, and you can understand why the people who are wanting to present a sunny view of their financial condition aren't going to go around advertising their problems. I can fully understand that. Well, Donald Trump is an exception to all sorts of rules, and I think that even Boris Johnson didn't manage to get away indefinitely with the sort of behaviour that eventually did for him. Whereas it looks as if in the United States, Trump has a real chance of getting re-elected if his health holds out, and that is a serious issue. His mental health is being commented on increasingly by a lot of observers.
Okay, so let's say you got past that Article 49, you got that through, first stage done. So we've now got a process. We've got the ascension, which can take a number of years, can't it, before that becomes to the next vote. So Article 4, you've sort of basically you've got to find past that stage, and so the process commences. Now, while these negotiations are going on with the EU and the structural changes to the United Kingdom's economy and untangling the trade deals, this is actually something that surprised me a little bit about George Eustace when he was talking about the Australian trade deal. Now, he said that he put pressure on to make sure there's a 6-month opt-out of that trade, because those trade deals don't sit well with the European Union, do they? Obviously, because they're using hormones and God knows what else.
No, but the Australian trade deal is a very interesting example. Even George Eustace, a very prominent Brexiter, an agricultural specialist, admitted that it was a rotten deal for the United Kingdom. It was done simply to allow Liz Truss to say, we've got a super duper trade deal that we wouldn't have got in the European Union. Too right we wouldn't, because we'd have got a much better deal if we'd been in the European Union. So I don't think there's going to be too much difficulty with disentangling ourselves from the trade deals, which essentially have been rolling over in most cases existing EU trade deals, except in some cases like Australia, where the trade deal is much worse than the deal we have with the European Union. Yeah, and Japan.
It's not great, is it? So
no, Australia is worse than Japan.
Oh God, yeah, especially for the farming industry in the United Kingdom is absolutely diabolical. And obviously the fact that the farmers obviously not getting their subsidies, the local regions are not getting their money.
Well, I think a lot of people are beginning to realise that for some people who advocated Brexit, particularly some political commentators and ministers, Brexit was an opportunity they thought, to put an end to regional aid, to put an end to subsidies, to install a much more neoliberal economic model for the United Kingdom. Now, you can be in favour of that or against it, but it's not particularly popular in the United Kingdom. And Brexit for these people was to be a back door whereby they were going to impose Singapore on Thames, a much more liberal, in the economic sense, economic model on the United Kingdom. And now people are beginning to realise that. And it's one of the reasons why Brexit is so unpopular. Because I'm not denying there are intellectual arguments that can be made in favour of a more neoliberal economic model. But it's got to be done honestly. It can't be done through the back door of pretending that that's what Brexit implies.
Or WhatsApp messages.
No, exactly.
That's the idea that these politicians are going around and discussing trade deals and just on personal WhatsApps, on personal phones. To me, it doesn't seem very business-like at all. It's ludicrous. In fact,
Brexit is not a business-like project. Brexit is a project of fantasy and lies, I'm afraid. And misconceptions, and some people were the mugs who were taken in by it, and others were the crooks who were doing the taking in. It's a rather unattractive mixture.
Going back to my first question regarding winning over, obviously, the public and political support, but we're going to need to get the media on side. I know we've got obviously social media, got YouTube and all that. We've obviously get a hell of a lot of coverage this way. But the likes of the Daily Mail, the Telegraph, the Express, all those papers always have a negative view of the EU and everyone who's members of the European Union or MEPs and what have you, all the Antichrist and all that. And how are we going to get them on side? Because not just for the public of the British citizens, but also to win over those MEPs and what have you people in the EU. How are we going to make them want us? Not just say, okay, that sounds like a good idea, but we want them to want us. How are we going to do that? How are we going to get them to actually,
Well, I think there are two separate things. I think there's the question of the British media. And you're right that
you'll be surprised how many people in the EU watch British media.
Well, they do follow it. They're much better informed about our political situation than we are about theirs. Largely the language barrier, because many more of them speak English.
That's embarrassing.
But then there's the point that the right-wing media over the past 15 years have lived in a cocoon with the Conservative government. That's coming to an end, and that's coming to an end in rather a dramatic fashion. All the address books and all the chummy relationships that the journalists, the political journalists in the Mail and the Express and the Telegraph have had with the Conservative Party, and particularly the right wing of the Conservative Party, that's all going to be useless overnight. There will be a shift, not immediately, not overnight, but there will be a shift in the attitudes of the British right-wing press. They will realise that they're just not getting anywhere if they carry on singing the anti-European tune.
If they think that the people aren't listening anymore, they're going to have to.
Well, if both the people and the politicians are not listening anymore, then I think over time that will make a difference, because profit and saleability is important to the right-wing press, and they've had it much too easy over the past 14 years. There's been this Westminster, not just the Westminster bubble, but the Westminster right-wing bubble, which has been a marvel to behold. It's worked very, very effectively. As far as the rest of Europe is concerned, as I say, I think they would regard it as a triumph for European integration if the British realised that there was no real future for themselves outside. Foreign and defence policy is going to be a very important issue in European integration. As you know, up till now, European integration has concentrated more on the economic and trading aspects of governmental activity. But now I think everything's being thrown up in the air by Ukraine, and the possibility of Trump being re-elected and the consequences that has for NATO. All these things, I think, are pressures for Europe to work much more closely together in the foreign and defence policy. And I think that the United Kingdom has a distinctive contribution to make to that, which our neighbours want us to make.
I understand that. Well, coming to the end of this interview, Brendan, is there anything you'd like to just finalise on? Obviously I'll put links in the description regarding your website and your manifesto. Yes, you actually got one.
Yes, we have. It's a general one, because we know that we're not going to be running traffic calming measures in Manchester as a result of this election. But I'd like to come back, if I may, to the point you were making about telling the truth. And I think that is very much linked to realistic choices. We're giving people a realistic choice to say they want to rejoin the European Union. And people sometimes say to me, what's the point of standing if you've got no chance of getting elected? I think that's a profoundly wrong approach to politics. It isn't just about getting a job for yourself, perhaps a well-paid or a prestigious job or whatever it is. It's about standing for something.
UKIP did that. Sorry, I'm interrupting, but UKIP actually used that policy. They got one MP in Parliament, and that was it. But it was the pressure. It was the pressure of Nigel Farage.
That's right. It's part of the democratic debate, a part of the democratic discourse that you're putting forward your arguments, and the fact that you're willing to stand up for those arguments and make them in public, and not be afraid of people saying, "Oh, he's wasting his time," is part of the process of credibility for our rejoining. Just the people that we've spoken to, the local other candidates in the hustings, for instance, a number of our candidates have been impressed by the way in which, during the public aspect of the hustings, the other candidates perhaps didn't agree with us, But then they came up to us afterwards and said, well, on the QT, really, we're rather sympathetic to what you're saying. And that's something that we want to inject or reintroduce into the public debate, the right to be able to say, of course, Brexit's a disaster, and because it's a disaster, we want to rejoin. And just saying that makes it more credible. And that's the process we want to engage in, to make rejoining more credible. And standing in elections is an integral part of that.
That's brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Brendan Donnelly, for joining me today, and tell me a little bit about what your views are, and the direction for the party, and obviously for the country as well, and what you can do to rejoin the European Union. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
And that was Brendan Donnelly of the Rejoin EU Party. Now, if you've got any comments, please leave them down below. Toodaloo.